how do we query such systems? How much detail we need to be in your query? What type of specific information we need to give? How to limit, let's say, the exposure of these GenAI models to the information from where we have to collect the elements and so on. So that was one part that we had to invest heavily with the users to bring them on these new ways of working and then give these new skills, I would say, on creating the right prompt for interacting with the GenAI.
Welcome back to The Smart Biotech Scientist. I'm your host, David Brühlmann, and if you're just joining us, you are catching part 2 of our insightful conversation with Abhijeet Satwekar on harnessing generative AI for regulatory guideline monitoring. Abhijeet is an innovation manager at Global Analytical Development at Merck Healthcare. In part 1, we explored how generative AI is transforming compliance operations. Now we're taking it further. How do you actually implement AI in a GXP environment without giving your quality team a collective heart attack? How do you measure success beyond just cool tech factor? If you're juggling process development, scale-up challenges, and wondering how to stay ahead of regulatory changes without working 80-hour weeks, this episode is your roadmap to working smarter, not harder. So whether you are on a morning commute or taking a break between meetings, let's dive into the practical side of AI implementation in regulated environments. Here is part 2 with Abhijeet Satwekar. Are you juggling the complexities of CMC development while trying to enjoy the beauty of biotech? Have you ever wondered if there's a way to simplify bioprocessing? Welcome to the Smart Biotech Scientist podcast, where we're diving headfirst into the very challenges you face. We're breaking it down, demystifying the jargon, and giving you the keys to unlock your full potential. I'm your host, David Brühlmann, and I get it. With 15 plus years in the biotech industry, I face the same challenges you do. There's a way to simplify and streamline so you can remove complexity, you can skip trials and errors, deliver without delay your groundbreaking therapy to clinics and market, and still enjoy every single step. Do you want to learn how industry experts and I did it? Grab a cup of coffee and your favorite notebook and pen. Now is the time to take your bioprocessing game to the next level. Let's smarten up biotech. So how in detail are you going to update that? Because traditionally, I guess someone was monitoring these and then you had some discussions. Now with generative AI, what is the change?
So basically, we were able to gain efficiency with the generative AI because it could parallelize all the tasks altogether and come up with insight which has been really, really quick. Even we have to think about that some of the guidelines are not available in their native language. Okay. So of course, means you can use the translation service, etc. But generative AI also has this capability where it could also move from different languages and come up with interpretation very accurately across those topics that are being discussed here. Another key thing, it is able to also bring additional elements into that interpretation because it all depends on how you prompt your query when you are extracting the information. You could also distill it down to a more simpler language that the operator can also understand. So, this gap of knowledge infusion, it is also accelerated with GenAI. For example, the guidelines are in English. Some of our French site can extract interpretation in the French language or the Italian language and so on. So that's also a very added value that we see GenAI has contributed into this.
I speak to a lot of people from the industry, and when you speak to people in R&D or in early process development, they're very excited about AI. But the closer you get to manufacturing and release, the less excitement there is. So I love that you are using generative AI, which seems to me very close to manufacturing or even in manufacturing. So what can you tell biotech leaders who are on the fence or hesitant? Because there's a lot of skepticism, and I think for good reasons. But what was your discussion with your team, and what were some pushbacks, and how did that go actually with people who are very close to manufacturing or even in manufacturing?
This is a great question, David, because that's my day-to-day life, day-to-day work. Yes, when we start on bringing certain technology, so there is always an excitement in terms of how the technology performs, what the technology is capable to delivering. But the key challenge, as you said, is really integrating this technology into the routine operations or the routine process. And again, this has multiple factors. But then we will focus more on the regulatory related requirements. Means if you want to bring such a advanced technology, means what are, let's say, the conditions that you need to pre-establish in order to set this technology there. And then the second component, which is also linked to the users, means how well the users are using this technology in alignment with the regulations or in alignment with this regulatory environment that we need to maintain when we have to produce these molecules or products, right? Okay, so now coming to the second part of your question, means how do we really meet each needs of the stakeholder? So we usually divide it into phases and then start to set some objectives across those phases as we progress them. First phase is just to demonstrate the proof of concept and mostly on the capability of the technology, what it could deliver, just to create the confidence across the stakeholder. Then it moves into the feasibility phase where we elaborate this technology into their routine business operation. So having much more deeper engagement across these end users, the quality, regulatory, etc. Trying to also in a detailed map what impact each of those stakeholder has with respect to this technology. Okay. And to give you an example, if you have to set this technology into a GMP space, you have the requirement coming from our quality assurance group related on the data integrity, the transparency related to the data. Then we have the IT organization who would then focus more on how are you setting this technology, which are the systems that are being used, how these systems are meeting say, our IT policies that are being set by the companies. As you know, the generative AI is a very hot topic with respect to the data it is being used and how this data maybe it's reused to train the model or it is kept inside a private line between the organization and the model, and then this data is not reused for the training. So these are again data privacy and governance topics, so which fortunately our organizations have really solved some of the requirement, those limitations by providing an access which is really safe and secure from the company to these models, and this is being set up at a global level. So at least means we have that channel which we could use to solve some of the limits related to the use of those models and the data to be shared and then avoid this reusing that data escaping from the company, etc.
How did you validate generative AI?
Validation is really a tough topic, and I would say that we are still working on it, means on this system. But you have to also view validation with respect to the use case that you are really following. Okay. For example, in the use case related to the guideline assessments, this we would consider as a non-GXP application. So the system doesn't need to be validated because it is more as an information system to generate information, and it doesn't take direct decisions on the changing the product, etc. So we always have the scientific experts in the loop, so as a human in the loop, which is also presented in a lot of external guidelines, this approach to have a human in the loop to gain more confidence on these advanced systems, how they deliver data, and then to review this outcome to be used for the end results. Theoretically, the system that currently we are using is a non-validated one, but then in terms of validation, means this is a topic that means we are collaborating with external consortia to know what are the best practices they have been doing. We are following the guidelines that has recently been released by FDA and EMA and so on this topic. And then I think slowly means we are moving in these directions where I think the main way or let's say the approach what they have highlighted in those guidelines is to adopt a total life cycle management approach on the product when you use these GenAI models.
So at the moment, it's still a very collaborative approach between a scientist and then the generative AI, actually, to avoid this huge validation need. So at the end of the day, it's still a scientist by his or her judgment who are making decisions, right?
Exactly. Again, if let's say we position Gen AI to take direct actions, for example, let me give you another use case that today we are running an adaptive control on a bioreactor. And if you introduce Gen AI there, I think that is where the validation needs to be fully driven. So in terms of validating the whole adaptive control system, let's say the system is using the data, what type of logics the Gen AI is using to take a decision, and then the outcome, how this outcome is really accurate in terms of each time a decision is taken. I would still see it more as a useful use case because we could always control on what is the input data that is going in into the LLM model and what is the outcome data that is, and then setting some of the studies and so on. We can test, the worst case, the best case, how the LLM is going to perform. Plus, we could also tune down the LLM across a certain range to respect that range in order to take that decision. So it is still a viable path forward, I would say, not, let's say, pure dead end.
How do you realize the full potential of that? Because you work in a regulated environment. There is a certain way of doing things. You have a certain mindset. You have a collaborative approach between AI and the scientist. So there's a lot of moving parts. So how do you use what you have, your current structure, your current organization and mindsets and the new technology to take the full out of that potential?
So, it is always a process that goes with a transition, moving from your legacy routines into your new routines, where you will have to use the Gen AI. And usually you will perform a comparative studies between what is the new process delivering and what the old process has been delivering. This would be done towards a certain period of time where we would collect inputs, feedbacks from end users, and then perform a sort of a risk assessment on this topic, that what is the risk that the technology is providing with respect to its performance, and then sitting across and then performing the risk assessment, the mitigation plans, etc. We define, let's say, how much independent or how much oversight the technology needs from a human to follow this mitigated action plans. And this is how built together with the functions, and then we drive together to replace the existing routines with the new ones.
How was the user acceptance, especially those who are used to routines?
As you know, the people working within the biotech sector means they are not having high skills in IT. And this is also our tendency that whenever we use for searching things, we use the Google approach. So you just put some keywords and try to get an outcome. This was, I think, one of the major challenges we faced when we brought the system about Gen AI. And if you are trying to use it like a Google, the results are not accurate when it comes to an outcome. So that was one part where we engaged in training the end users in terms of, first of all, how do we query such systems? How much detail we need to be in your query? What type of specific information we need to give? How to limit, let's say, the exposure of these Gen AI models to the information from where we have to collect the elements and so on. So that was one part that we had to invest heavily with the users to bring them on these new ways of working, and then give these new skills, I would say, on creating the right prompt for interacting with the Gen AI.
Now, speaking of the prompt, I would like to just dive into a bit more the technical aspects, because what struck me is that you assess information that quote beyond text from guidelines. What does that mean and how does that work?
So, in the guideline documents, the information is presented in text, tables, figures, formulas. So, there are various representations of information. This is where how I would quote it from the guidelines. Now, generative AI models has been very powerful and very efficient when they had to pull information from the text. But then still, if you think of this topic, the text is one of the elements of information present in these documents. We still need to rely on the what information is present in the figures, as well as the tables and the relationships across the columns in the tables. Yeah, so this has to also be understood by the generative AI model. So when we started this proof of concept, which the earliest model that was released, I think that was with the ChatGPT 1, and there was this major limitations that it was not going beyond text. At that time and still now, we are seeing the emergence of these multimodal models which are coming up. They could analyze images, but still the scientific image analysis is still a limiting factor. So as a turnaround for these limitations, what we are doing, we are using heavy scripting at the back end. Also now currently means we are also seeing the emergence of these agentic AIs, right? So where these are agents which have some logics also ingrained, so they could also follow the logical process to build the arguments around the query and then give you a proper response, which has been a major, I would say, enhancement in terms of accuracy compared to the first model that we used. But as we were using the first model, we had already put a lot of efforts in the scripting, almost equivalent to what we see with an agentic AI now, where the scripting was done in a way that we provided additional elements in a text format to make figures understood by the model. So whenever in a text there was a code for a figure, it could go to the annotations that we had provided to the end users, which describes the figure in a text language, and then it could consider this for compiling its response. That was a little turnaround that we worked during that time. Similarly, for the formulas, We have a guidance, I would say, area where the how the symbols are being used between different guidelines, because some guidelines may use different symbols for explaining the same thing in the formulas. So that type of alignment, the harmonizations, we did it with sort of a library approach in going further. So these were some of the strategies that we used to solve these limitations. And now going with an agentic approach means there was already a strong base that we created in terms of data organization. So I would call it data structuring, data organization. And with a logic based approach of the current new models, this has become much more accurate in terms of giving the outcomes.
As the technologies are evolving, I mean, they're almost evolving at light speed every single day. We have news about the new technology, a new agent, a new model. What is your vision of the future? Where do you think in a few years will this totally automatic? Will there still be some interactions? Will the approach completely change? What is your take on that?
It's really amazing to see how the technology has been evolving. And even I was initially quite skeptical on what GenAI was capable of doing. But as you experience it, then you tend to gain confidence in the technology as we move forward. And similar thing is also happening with guidelines that are coming up, right? So the guidelines are being released to indicate the elements or point in a way that how best you can deliver a confidence in the way the technology is working and in a way the technology is driving an outcome. Of course, let's say the movements in the healthcare space are a bit slower in terms of onboarding the technology and then making it like a fully accepted in a fully autonomous mode. This would still require time in terms of the community acceptance around this. But then we have to also look at the efficiency aspect on that one, the value aspect, that how it is really accelerating, for example, the needs for the patients, right? So if in some way means we are accelerating the timelines, if in some way we are really bringing the medicines more faster to the patient. So I think this would also trigger a bit more on the acceptance side and then and mostly for the general benefit for the community.
Yeah, and something that would also trigger even more acceptance is the return on investment, because I think that's also where a lot of people are hesitant. Definitely, there's a hype, there's a lot of things AI can do, but closer to the regulatory environment, there is a bigger hesitancy. So, what can you tell us about the return on investment?
The IT is getting expensive and costly, right? Every year means we are seeing quite a rise in the costs that you need. And that is also becoming a challenging factor for the adoption of technologies, because you also need to balance the cost to the benefit value that you're investing into these technologies and the value that is going to deliver. For topics related to the compliance, for the topics which are really important for a therapeutic molecule, compliance, quality, and so on, this is where the use of technology can be further extended or embraced more rapidly. But when it really comes to show efficiency, when we have to really demonstrate that there is a financial value coming out from this type of investments, this sometimes become challenging mostly to the cost of investments, the cost of maintenance, and then overall it takes out the cost of goods that you have on your product that you're going to sell. So this is a calculation that I think has to be carefully crafted and discussed in terms of taking a decision. That has been, let's say, the major, I would say, conflicting area when a technology has to move into manufacturing. So first of all, to demonstrate what concrete value the technology is going to bring. So either if it is in compliance or if it is really giving on efficiency. When we are talking about efficiency, what are the numbers it is contributing to? Whether it is reduction in batch failures, whether it is enhancing their quality, or whether it is increasing the efficiency by certain figures. And this is something still difficult to measure or to calculate or to follow up. And that's the pull and push that usually happens on the acceptance there.
Abhijit, what is the number one advice you would give to another biotech leader who is considering generative AI in their compliance or their release strategy?
I would suggest to always start with an experience-based exploration, conducting proof of concept, which I think every organization does it, but going one step beyond that and then performing these extensive explorations together with the stakeholders and then perform a risk assessment on that one. So both in terms of financials, operations, or various compliance and so on. So having a detailed understanding on this topic there on the use case itself means it would allow the senior leadership to take a decision rather than going on one or two areas where see efficiency but you have not yet iterated it. How does it relate to a compliance, or how does it relate to a financial performance, and so on? Those topics would really be ideal. And then going a bit beyond, you also need to look at how this application would fit into your entire ecosystems of your IT solutions. Because we see a lot of technologies that are coming up, and then some of them are also very much customized. And in the end, means what you tend to do is to create silos inside your ecosystem. So the connectivity across this application that you are bringing, how does it seamlessly fits with your other IT systems, and then allows the data flow across. That could be another crucial elements to look for. Otherwise, this becomes just an additional cost, sits on top of your existing architecture, and then you tend to maintain those lines. So that's the balance where you really need to look around.
As we're wrapping up, Abhijeet, if you had to distill our entire conversation into one actionable insight, what would it be?
I would put more focus on the upcoming guidelines that are being released by the health authority, because health authorities are engaged in conducting these user use case meetings, trying to know more about what industry members are doing, the experience around these topics, and then getting this feedback to frame the path for the future guidelines that are coming up. So I would recommend that positioning your use case not just internally or not just discussing internally within your organization, but it's really important to go at a community level, because in the end, the authorities will always be open for accepting a technology that has a community acceptance. Yes. And this is where means I would really watch for, instead of going in silos to the health authorities and presenting it, because we have seen with a couple of use cases that even if you do demonstrate that the technology is efficient and performant, but the authorities are still concerned and they say, okay, what about the other industry members? Means why they are not adopting this, what you have done so far, right? So going at them just at a technology level with a community approach, so that could be a best strategy for uplifting the entire sector, I would say.
This has been great, Abhijeet. I very much enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. Thank you for sharing your project. And where can people get a hold of you?
So thank you very much, David. It's always a pleasure to discuss these technical topics with you. So since the time which we have been together in Merck, so I really enjoy this discussions and then driving projects together. So you could find me on LinkedIn. So I'm there, since I could anyways be open to always catch up on a virtual coffee or something, listen to your thoughts and to discuss on technical topics. So more than happy to follow upon that.
Fantastic. I will leave the links in the show notes. Smart Biotech Scientists, please reach out to Abhijeet. And Abhijeet, I really hope also that we'll have another opportunity to innovate together and even, who knows, win another innovation contest. That's always a good memory back in the days when we were at Merck. And yeah, thank you very much for being back on the show. Who knows, in a few years, we'll have another opportunity to have another interview. I'm sure you're going to innovate a lot in the next coming years. So huge pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Abhijeet.
Likewise, David, it's really a pleasure to be part of this show and happy to contribute with all the insights and the knowledge which could be shared across the various scientists.
And there you have it, the blueprint for bringing generative AI into regulatory monitoring strategies from someone who's actually done it successfully. I want to thank Abhijeet Satwekar for sharing these invaluable insights that could potentially save your company months of development time and millions in compliance cost. If you're ready to implement innovative strategies but need guidance specific to your development pipeline, I'm here to help. Book a free call at Brühlmann Consulting/call to discover how you can fast-track your biotech development. I'll show you how to apply new technologies and strategies to ensure your groundbreaking therapies reach patients without the roadblocks of missed compliance requirements. This is David Brühlmann reminding you that science may give you headaches, but biologic development should not. This is David Brühlmann signing off. All right, smart scientists. That's all for today on the Smart Biotech Scientist podcast. Thank you for tuning in and joining us on your journey to bioprocess mastery. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. By doing so, we can empower more scientists like you. For additional bioprocessing tips, visit us at smartbiotechscientist.com. Stay tuned for more inspiring biotech insights in our next episode. Until then, let's continue to smarten up biotech.